Dan Proft, AM 560 Morning Drive host. Welcome you to another edition of Against the Current, live from the Skyline Club atop the Old Republic Building in downtown Chicago. On this edition, we're pleased to be joined by political science professor, chaired political science professor at the University of Chicago, Charles Lipson. You can also catch Professor Lipson's commentaries at realclearpolitics.com with frequency. Charles, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan.
I know you have a lot to say on matters geopolitical, but I want to start with your insights on campus politics, because you're on a campus. You're on a relatively liberal campus. You're perhaps the most important University of Chicago presence since Jay Berwanger, right? The first size. I mean, is that fair? Is that fair to say?
Well, he won the Heisman Trophy, and so far, I'm not even a trophy wife.
Yeah, well, right. They disbanded the football program shortly thereafter. When you leave, I assume they'll disband the political science.
It's gone.
Yeah, right. But campus politics. So, just recently, the Bill Buckley program at Yale commissioned this survey and found nationally, 51% of students on college campuses support speech codes. A greater majority support trigger warnings and all the other modern nomenclature we use to basically describe people who are intolerant of views that are not theirs. What is the experience at the University of Chicago? How jarring should we view that statistic or those statistics?
I can't believe you said that, and that you didn't give me some kind of
Do you need a safe
heads
space
up.
over here?
Yes,
Yeah.
I need to, that you didn't give me any heads up before you said that.
I should have. I should be a warning label on me. Yeah. Yes.
I actually read a few months ago that the students at Columbia University in New York wanted to have trigger warnings before they discuss Greek myths.
Sure.
Right.
You don't want to offend Perseus? I don't know.
No, you don't want to offend the students who might read them. It's not just offense.
Because some people think they're true, and you don't want to offend people who think Greek mythology is historically accurate? Or?
So there are people who suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome, mostly military people who've returned. That's not what this is about. And I think anybody who has suffered a horrendous crime or armed robbery or a rape or something like that, you want to be attentive to them. Well, I think what's going on is people trying to use, trying to be bossy under the cloak of moral righteousness.
You can't use the term bossy. That's that. Sandberg and from Facebook and Condi Rice have banned that term. So
is it true?
Well,
I don't know. I got to catch up on my reading. The fact is, I think that one of the ways of dividing the pie of American politics, other than the left-right division that's obvious, is between the people whose view is, I know what's best for you, Dan, and what's best is not smoking a cigar, not having a drink, and the rest of us who say, just leave us the hell alone. And I think that there's on the left and the right, there's that. I think it's a human tendency. But what I think is so strange on college campuses is that the women who are out marching with signs, "Take back the night, we're strong women," are the same ones who are saying, "Oh, I'm just a wilt. I'm just going to wilt. If you say that, I'm just going to wilt and lie down on my chaise lounge."
Yeah.
Well, look, you can't have it both ways. I think we need more insensitivity training. More insensitivity training. Not for people to just let things roll off their back or respond to it.
More exposure to you doing an impersonation of a Southern Belle. That would set some people straight.
Well, really, I'm only sorry you don't have my full skirt.
Yeah.
I think that the real damage that's done is the tendency to suppress speech, lest it somehow run afoul of the PC police.
Well, right, but that used to be understood. But the college, the free marketplace of idea and campus, where you have a diversity of opinions that come into conflict with one another, and you reason them out. That's almost it's almost considered a dog whistle or hate speech these days. It's something different. I mean, you've been at UFC for how long?
I've been there since the late 70s.
Okay, so over the last 35 years,
It's gotten worse.
Yeah, I mean, what has been the progression or the regression?
So let me give you an example. UFC is actually does pretty well, and I want to give you an example of why, but I want to first give you an example of the negative. And this is at Swarthmore, which is one of the absolute elite colleges. Mm-hmm. Students at Swarthmore are as smart and capable as students anywhere. And it has a kind of vaguely, it was originally a Quaker school, but there's nothing left of any of that.
It's like Ivy League schools that were divinity schools.
Right, exactly.
No, you're not allowed to believe in God and go there.
Right. And some trustee or something came to give a speech about fracking. And the president of the university was in the room, small room. The dean of students was in the room, and other students came in and prevented him from speaking. Now, that would be bad enough, but the president of the university was in the room and did nothing. The dean of students was in the room and did nothing. When you can shout people down and nothing happens to you, those students should have been, at the very least, gotten a red card, right? I mean, they should have gotten some kind of, at the very least, warning, if not expelled outright.
I'm surprised it got that far. I mean, at Williams College, they had essentially an unpopular ideas week. The point at Williams College, the alma mater of Bill Bennett, another great small liberal arts school, and there are instances of this too, Ian Hersey Lee being uninvited from campus.
From Brandeis, and every single woman in the gender studies program signed a petition to prevent her from receiving an award. No person has done more to protect vulnerable women, especially Muslim women in Africa, than Hersey Ali, and yet...
And wasn't it Justice Brandeis, who said that the cure for unpopular speech is more speech? So they're not even familiar with the philosophical disposition of the name,
and don't think about being pro-Israel. Don't think about that.
You can think about boycotting Israel.
You absolutely.
Yeah.
But don't think about positions like that, because you would be blaming the victim. And the problem here is, if I had to sort of step back, I would say that what's happened on a lot of these campuses is that people are immediately sorted into one of two groups. And the groups are your weak, poor, allegedly from a minority, an approved minority group. So you could be African American, your father could be a senior partner in a major law firm, your mother could be an investment banker, but you're weak and oppressed, and you're a victim. Victim is a crucial word here. And then somebody like you have a couple of parents, you're raised in a hardworking household, and taught the right values. You're an oppressor. And in fact, if you think about...
I prefer the term patriarchal oppressor.
Right, you're a patriarch. Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And sorting the campus into oppressors and victims sort of begins a really pernicious process in which people can't have serious discussion of issues.
This is Williams College, so they have this Unpopular Ideas Week.
Yeah.
The point is to hear speakers of divergent opinions on the political landscape across the spectrum, and then the first conservative speaker that they invite to speak, then there's immediately an outcry that no, she shouldn't be allowed to speak, get rid of her, and they get rid of her. It seems to me the difference, the morphing of political correctness that's gone on in college campus from my time at Northwestern, which is awful, and that's 20 years ago, is it used to be driven by the students.
Right.
Now it's driven by the professors where the students just all jump on the bandwagon? And maybe it's the students that become professors?
It's driven by the professors in the humanities and the soft social sciences, plus the activist student groups. So the number one victims group, assuming they're not Native Americans on every campus are African Americans. The number one international victims group are Palestinians. Palestinians protest every Israeli activity. And what's so interesting to me is to see the groups that don't view themselves as victims. The Jewish kids on campus, especially pro-Israel kids, actually are victimized, but they don't think of themselves as victims.
Right.
If you're an Asian woman from Manhattan who plays the violin, you had to get past the highest barriers to get into Harvard, Yale, Chicago, Stanford, Northwestern. And the fact is, you have been discriminated against. They don't view themselves that way. But the most interesting group are Hispanics. Hispanics generally, and I don't just think on campus, I think in general, view themselves as an upwardly mobile ethnic group that we see lots of influx.
Like the first generation to go to college, that kind of thing.
But the first generation to go to college, their children are going to do better than they did.
Right.
They're kind of like conventional American. Now, their leaders, the Spanish language radio stations and the people who had La Raza and, the Democratic Party kind of operatives, they want to turn them all into victims. But my sense is that they're not winning.
Yeah, but so what comes out of that whole oppressor versus victim dichotomy you're describing, though, is a lot of the perceived oppressors, at least from the perspective of this kind of lobotomized groupthink.
Yeah.
They come out of college with guilt. They believe they're oppressors, right. And right. So they kind of tend to apologize for success or for views that they think are common sense, but they dare not speak aloud, right. and it perpetuates.
They end up running the Ford Foundation.
Well, right, it perpetuates the silence, frankly,
right.
Because they perpetuate the culture that described them erroneously as an oppressor. So it becomes this vicious Alinsky cycle.
If you were to ask them who pays taxes in America, 80% of the taxes paid by the top 20%. I'm sure none of them know that. They think in static terms and in redistributionist terms. And one of the great achievements of
But enough about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the great achievements of the Scottish Enlightenment in particular, and Adam Smith as its avatar, is the sense that we can grow, that we can progress, that we don't have to think always in terms of a fixed pie.
But is what's going on college campus the Stanford prison experiment writ large? Is it where, I don't want to be a prison guard, I'd rather be prison, I don't want that responsibility. But when you're given that power, man, how quickly you move to oppressing the prisoners. And so people are empowered by the ability to shame others and take this morally superior posture, even though it is illegitimate, and people like it. And so this is kind of a classic problem of power, and not enough people truly, despite what the social justice movement says, speaking truth to power.
I think there's a lot of that. I think that a lot of universities, there's not a sense that they're adults in charge, that the adults have taken the position that the easiest way to handle all this is just to concede on it.
This is what Shelby Steele was talking about 40 years ago in White Guilt.
Right.
This is exactly it. So this is just kind of scaling the 60s.
If you want to see it in operation in the whole culture, look at the fact that we no longer celebrate Columbus Day. Why? And you could never celebrate it on a college campus. Why is that? Columbus is seen as the exemplar of everything that was wrong. It was imperialistic, it was suppression of the natives. There's a notion, nobody would articulate it, that indigenous people are superior, that this is Rousseau and the noble savage. But there's a deep sense of contempt, actually, for them. There's a reason why terrorists are not sort of look down on. They're kind of natives there. It would be wrong to judge them with our standards and so forth.
And this is particularly pernicious, and it's underestimated, because this isn't just, skulls full of mush, to borrow a Rushism, on college campuses whose opinions are going to change and so on. This permeates to the highest, most sensitive levels of government, including the military, where a couple of months ago we have 2 officers whose careers are now in jeopardy because they had the audacity to stand up to pedophiles in Afghanistan who are our alleged, allies, brothers in arms fighting the Taliban, but American soldiers weren't going to go along with their exploitation of young boys. And the response by our military is to punish those soldiers.
It was absolutely outrageous. And I would say we actually now have more slaves in the world than there have ever been in the world. Many of them are in the Middle East. You never hear boo about them. A fair number are sex slaves, both men and women, that are brought in. You don't hear. And I think it would be considered sort of impolite, putting something rude in the punch bowl, if you were to speak about it. I actually think students, even those who sharply disagree with me, are well served by hearing a counter argument, as long as I don't make it hard for them to respond and never mark them in a way that favors my own viewpoint. And actually, that is the deepest corruption on campus, where people only admit students who have the same viewpoints, only want to hire faculty who have the same viewpoints, punish those who are below them. They're all about equality in some abstract sense, but when they have research assistants, they treat them like dirt, that kind of thing. I just find that noxious.
What's the history in this? How did conservatives completely abdicate, free thinkers even, completely abdicate college campuses and then abdicate K through 12 education?
I think those are different questions, but I think that part of the problem on college campuses was that has been for a long time. There's been a kind of anti-intellectual dimension among conservatives. There needn't be, but. And especially in among Catholic conservatives, where you have a very rich tradition of conservative thinking, going back 2,000 years, and so you can go to Holy Cross or you can go to Notre Dame or something.
But even more recently, though, I mean, that's an interesting statement, because I think of the people that I look up to, the people that informed my understanding of the world as I was just reading and trying to figure it out, and it's conservative academics.
Right.
Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, Milton Friedman, Alan Bloom.
Right. I knew Alan reasonably well. Alan lived on the next block, and I would just be walking into school, and Alan would be we would walk in together and chat as we walked in. Of course, I know a lot of people who work with him. I think that there are different kinds of conservatives. Some of the people you're talking about are essentially free market conservatives, and on the social side, libertarian. I actually find myself in a lot of agreement with them. There are some who are social conservative, but there's also a dimension that I think we haven't mentioned that I think is critically important and is actually at risk in America. It doesn't get talked about enough, and that's civil society. That is the Tocqueville dimension. And between you, Dan Proft, and the state, or between me, Charles Lipson, and the state, there are all these different voluntary social groupings that we're part of.
The platoons of democracy that Burke referred to.
Absolutely. And one of the problems is that the state penetrates more and more of them. If you go, as my wife and I do, to Steppenwolf Theater or
Goodman
or Shakespeare, and you open the program, you'll see page after page of donors. And some of them just write a check, but some of them belong to clubs where the donors are. I'm actually, for over 30 years, have gone with a group of people to the Shakespeare. We have lunch together, then we go. But if you go to the equivalent in France, there's one thank you. It's to the Ministry of Culture. And I think that the sense that the state moves down and penetrates this and in effect removes the need for an Elks Club or a volunteer fire department. You can't have a volunteer fire department in Chicago, but in a little town I grew up in, you had a volunteer fire department. You had the Masons, and you had the Chamber of Commerce, and you had all these little organizations, and plus the churches, of course. And I would say, and that was complemented by something that happened more in your parents' generation than happens in yours and mine, which is how many times a week did people come over to play cards with your dad or knit with your mom or whatever they are? And I think there's a lot less of that. How many times do people come over to your house to do that compared to your dad? So I think
they're not invited to my house.
Huh?
They're not invited to my house, so that's part of the issue.
Well, they're not given the secret password.
That's correct. The undisclosed location.
I think that rebuilding this in the next generation is very, very important. And it's one of the things that's good about college campuses. We talked about things that are bad. By the way, one thing that's good about college campuses is that they have this really vibrant amount of social organizations. There are kids out tutoring, they're raising money for cancer, they're meeting as Jewish students or Muslim students or Christian students, all different kinds of things.
The burning dummies of you in effigy. So something for, it's fun on a Wednesday evening.
As long as they spell my name right.
That's right.
And the other thing that I want to say that's good is that the University of Chicago, starting in the late 60s, had a big report which became sort of taken as gospel that we support free speech. And it was redone last year with a sort of prominent liberal law professor leading the program. And they reiterated it, that not only do we support free speech, one of the things we mean by that is that institutional parts of the university will not take political positions so that you, Dan, or as a student or as a faculty member or as an administrator, can take your own personal position. But the political science department's not going to be for or against the war in Iraq.
Right.
We can take positions perhaps on national educational issues, but sometimes you see these kind of things. We think there's too much fracking in America, and it's signed by college presidents. You'll never see a USC, University of Chicago president sign that. And one of the nice things that's happened about that is that other universities are beginning to adopt it. Purdue, under a truly great leader, Mitch Daniels, former governor of Indiana, a person who really should move back to the national level, I hope. He is like, if they haven't already adopted it, they're going to. Other universities are going to do it. And part of free speech means you can't shout down others.
Does that updated report still have the rider in there that you still must max out to the Obama campaign? Is that included, or no, that was stricken?
I remember when I went into my local Walgreens, which is in Obama's home neighborhood, in 2008, I asked them, is there a small section of the store that's non-Obama related merchandise, like drugs or candy or something?
Sure.
It was nothing but books and masks and posters and so forth. But you don't see much of that anymore. And I think that it raises the biggest issue that people are going to ask as we come out of what are, to me, these disastrous years of the Obama presidency. I think the most immediate question they're going to ask is, how come the basic issues that he intended to remedy, which were income inequality, race relations, and so forth, have not only not been remedied, but have gotten worse? But the bigger question that's related to that is, when you look at riots in Baltimore, when you look at the free fire zone that is the south side and west side of Chicago, the poor areas, or Detroit or Gary, Indiana, people say, look, in the mid-1960s, we began a series of great society programs. They really continued and heavily funded all the things that Franklin Roosevelt began to set in place. So this Roosevelt to LBJ all the way now to Obama, with only the Reagan period as really a clear exception to that. It hasn't worked. And if you asked people, what did we set out to do in 1965? What were the objectives? To make sure that the poor sort of moved up, were prepared for the modern economy, got a better education, lived in safer communities, weren't discriminated against. Well, they aren't discriminated against now, at least in a de jure sense. They're discriminated against if they come out of a bad education system, have dropped out, then they go to prison.
Oh, I got no chance.
You know,
right.
What's their chance? There's no uncle in the entire community. Everybody's being raised by a mother. 80% African American children in the city of Chicago are being raised are born out of wedlock to single mothers. This is catastrophic.
But I want to go back to, you referenced the small town you grew up in.
Yeah.
I want to just rewind that for a second,
Yeah.
because I think that'd be interesting to see and understand how that plays out on college campus with your students. So you grew up in Marks, Mississippi, bastion of Judaism.
It was where Jews all around the world looked to for
Sure.
intellectual leadership.
That's right.
The three families
That's
that
right.
were in Marks.
You emerged.
Yeah.
And this is back during Jim Crow. Right?
I well remember it.
And so when you talk about the faux victims on campus, the ersatz victims because somebody said a crossword or took a position on tax policy,
real victims
that they didn't like.
Yeah.
Right. So when do you have that conversation with your students, and does that give them any perspective to, you know, stop your bedwetting and grow up and understand the world a little bit?
It doesn't affect them any more than when you heard it. You're like, when I was growing up during the Depression, we didn't have a candy bar. We had only one wheel on our bicycle.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bicycle. It was a
Right.
unicycle.
Right. And we all had to run away and join the circus.
Yeah, and everything cost a quarter.
Right.
But the fact is, I learned a number of things from that experience growing up, but I want to say two or three of them. One is, I found the segregation, or at least in my mind's eye today, I think of myself back then as finding the segregation appalling. And my family did. They didn't find it. So they weren't segregationists. They didn't like it. And a lot of my friends, people who were otherwise sort of good people, just sort of went along with it, thought this is how it was.
Sheeple.
And what I thought, and maybe they thought I was doing the same, who knows? But I spoke out. But one of the things that I took away from that, Dan, is the fact that if everybody believes it, it don't make it right. You know, in other words, I'm willing to stand up. And the second thing is, I saw people who were really oppressed. I can't walk through an antebellum mansion. It just seems, at a gut level, it feels like it was built on the backs of slaves. So when I hear some pseudo-intellectual like Melissa Harris, she used to be Harris Perry, now Harris Lakewell, or whatever she is. Anyway, Melissa.
She paid her taxes yet?
I don't know. Anyway, Melissa was a colleague of mine for a while, so I actually knew her. When I hear her reprimand a journalist, a liberal journalist who talks about Paul Ryan as being hardworking, she says, you can't say he's hardworking. Slaves are hardworking. And I have a picture of slaves. My God, if you're going to be called out, I was brought up not to feel entitled, to feel I had responsibilities for people who were worse off than me, but that I wasn't but unless I had done something, I wasn't guilty for their state. And to speak out and hold my own views and not feel like I had to go along with everybody. Those have held me in good stead.
But it's kind of distressing, at the same time that a lot of these students make kind of generic references to slavery or other instances of real oppression, government-sponsored racism in the history of this country or other countries.
Right.
Then you explain to them what you saw as a young man growing up in Marks, Mississippi, and it's just an old man talking. I mean, the disconnect there for smart kids. You're not a sharp kid if you're going to University of. I mean, you're not a sharp kid. You're somebody who's got it together. If you're going to University of Chicago,
13 people for every one we take.
So you got it together intellectually if you're going to University of Chicago, and for them to offer the response you're suggesting to your experience versus them disagreeing about corporate tax policy and feeling the same victimization as somebody who was in Jim Crow South, pretty sad commentary.
It is. I must say, my own experience with USC students is that they are, when you put them in a small seminar and get everybody discussing, there's a wide range of views. Conservatives, we have a vibrant Republican club on campus. I'm the campus advisor to them.
Imagine that.
When David Axelrod set up the Institute
for Political Skullduggery,
when he set that up, I've known David for a long, long time. When David set that up, we had a discussion before, and I said, look, even if you want it to be even-handed, you're really going to have to work at it because your Rolodex is all one side. And I can't speak highly enough of what they've done. It's a place where the campus Republicans feel good to come, where Republican candidates are invited in. I mean, it's liberal, but it's in the sense that, but not as liberal as the anthropology department. And they make a real effort. And if you're a kid who comes in there and wants a summer internship, you don't have to just go to a Democrat. No.
Isn't that a little bit of the tallest skyscraper in Wichita, though?
Well, I want to give them credit. You can't ask people to do. You can't ask people to do something and then they do as good a job as they can at it and not give them credit for it. And in this case, I think, look, you can say X or Y about what you think David has done in the past, and you can think that there's some skullduggery there and that it's more or less than its equivalent on the Republican side. I'm just telling you that they've tried to make a space on campus where there's general discussion, where you can be on the left and right, where they're always among their people who are coming in. They always have somebody from the National Review who's there for 6 months or something, not just people from the New Republic or the or Atlantic or the Nation. They make an effort, and students. And they also have in military people to talk about what's going on. You just couldn't do this at Swarthmore. You couldn't do this at Harvard. And students are empowered by the administrators, and in fact, there are people like me who push back when there are students who do things that you or I might find offensive. So they have a Halloween party and they put on Mexican costumes. I had
at Louisville, you're talking about.
Well, where
they did it, yeah, right.
But we had something like that at the University of Chicago a few years ago. I had discussions with the general counsel's office and dean of students. I said, under what grounds are they called in? This is freedom of speech. And I think the biggest danger in terms of freedom of speech is when I ask students, I just asked them this question. I said, do you think you have more freedom of speech out on the sidewalk outside the university or inside the university? And I don't know what year it changed, but in 1954, 1964, 1974, somewhere you began to have more freedom out on the sidewalk than you have in the paneled rooms of the university.
That's really an interesting litmus test question. I think that's a really good way to measure it especially as the answer changes over the course of decades. I think that's an interesting perspective on where college campuses are at.
What would you say? What would you say?
Oh my gosh! I mean, at Northwestern,
Yeah.
for example, I routinely, on my little radio program, I admonish people: do not even consider wasting $60,000 a year to send your child to Northwestern.
Why?
What are you doing? Because 250 grand. Go to Hillsdale College. Go to Claremont McKenna, go to University of Dallas, and read the classics. Actually be steeped in true scholarship.
It's
and be exposed.
That is so important.
And be exposed to people that are actually interested in exchanging ideas, where you have intelligence conversations about philosophers and political philosophy and how a free society should be ordered. Those discussions don't go on at places like Northwestern because everybody's too busy engaged in that oppressor-victim dichotomy that you outlined.
Right.
So what's that? What, 250 grand for that? That's crazy. I understand college is about it's an expensive networking program, and a lot. It used to be, at least a lot of times, meeting your mate, and I get that. But in terms of that cost for whatever residual benefit you're getting for that credential, crazy.
Right, and I think a lot of parents are thinking that, but the demand to go to the elite schools,
Sure.
the very top schools, is still extremely high. You get a really good education, and especially if you're getting a degree in biology or chemistry. I've got a son who's getting something in statistics, things like that.
The hard sciences. That's a little bit.
You come out with
story.
a degree. You come out with a degree in basket weaving.
But Mitch Daniels, when we just reference at Purdue, one of the great things he says, which I think is true, it's not so much where you go to college, it's how you go to college.
This is true. And it's not so much what you've accomplished when you're 21, it's what you accomplish over the rest of your life. When I was in graduate school, I didn't live with other sort of people getting PhDs. I lived with young lawyers, young nurses, a mix of men and women.
And of course you live with young nurses.
Well, really, I think you've probably seen that movie.
Yes.
Charles Lipson starring in With Young Nurses.
Right.
No, but
yes. Yes. You were young. You needed to put your way through grad school.
I'll tell you one thing. I was young. I needed the money. Mm-hmm.
It's all tasteful art house flicks.
Really, it's all black and white.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned from a woman who's still a good friend. She went to a lower mid-range state university. Smart person. Didn't take a liberal arts education. She was learning to be a nurse. She needed to earn a living. Beside her bed at night, there was always a good novel. Mm-hmm. Well, she's now 67, 68. She's read another 45 years worth of novels and history and all of that. There's no comparison with doing 2 or 3 years at no matter how good a university. And now you can go online. I've done it. I've taken great courses in Greek history.
Yeah, sure.
From great professors. I'm doing that sort of thing all the time. Friends write me who are old, lifelong friends. They just read books X or book Y. And it's part of civil society too. My wife is part of 2 or 3 book groups where they sit. One of her groups that meets this week is a group that reads autobiographies.
Well, that's what education is supposed to be.
Exactly.
What did Yeats say? It's the lighting of a fire, not the filling of a pail. It's supposed to put you on a path to be a lifelong learner. But that's not what, I don't want to digress to the K through 12 education, but that's not what's happening.
Well, that's right. K-12 education we can talk about some other time, but my own view is it's the tragedy of the country.
I want to go back to something that you kind of alluded to earlier. You talked about what's happening on campuses with the closing of the college mind, to paraphrase a Bloomism, and how that relates to then people's inability to call evil evil, to call terrorists terrorists, because it has a geopolitical implication. We mentioned the example of our couple of military guys in Afghanistan, but it's much bigger than that, isn't it?
comments or silences of President Obama and use them as illustrations. The first is one that I don't think is mentioned much. Have you ever heard President Obama talk about our Judeo-Christian tradition?
No, I've heard him talk about us getting off our Judeo-Christian high horses.
Exactly. And if you look up on the White House website, as I have, do a search for Judeo-Christian, you will literally not find anything. When he mentions these religions, if at all, it is the term he likes is Christians and Muslims, Hindus and Jews. And what happens, there's nothing wrong with including more religions, and if he wants to include Buddhists, fine. But the point is, and it goes back to what we were saying about Columbus, the United States is deeply grounded in the West's tradition. It's a tradition that goes back, it includes, even for Jews like me, Jesus is saying, render unto Caesar. That is, we don't believe in Caesaropapism. We don't believe that the state, the leader of the state, and the leader of the church are the same person as they are in Iran. That means that if you're politically opposed to the Ayatollah who runs it, you're not just politically opposed, you're a heretic. Okay? And there's this tradition. And it's also, and part of the tradition is that the church and the state are largely separate spheres. Now, they overlap, and these are debated issues about how deeply grounded in morality various, but one thing that we would all agree about, I think, is that, for example, that human beings make laws. That's not agreed around the world. The people who favor Sharia law believe fundamentally that law comes from the Quran and it comes from Allah, and that human law, if it in effect fleshes that out or makes it specific, that's fine, but it should never contradict that. And that's the fundamental source of law. There's also a deep awkwardness about saying that anyone else's culture is wrong. Okay?
Sure.
And so that means if they circumcise young girls, you could say it's wrong if it's a patriarchy. So then men are bad. Those men over there are bad. But in the case
what are Islamic theocracies?
Well, those are men, it's true. But female circumcision is done by grandmothers with their grandchildren. It's not a male, in other words, but the general point is, who are we in the West to say? And I think the answer to that is that the achievements of the West, and this is the tragedy of college education today, the achievements of the West, scientifically, in terms of the Enlightenment, in terms of human flourishing, are the greatest achievements of all time. Now, it's also true that we had the Holocaust, and it didn't just happen in some remote country. It happened in Germany, which is Germany, France, Italy, England, and maybe America are the centerpiece of the West. So it's not as if we don't have to come to terms with that, but it's also true that human life has been extended. If you or I had been sort of selected at random 1,000 years ago, we would have lived through starvation. We would have been cold in the winter. We would have been hot in the summer. Our teeth would have been falling out at 22, and we would have been dead by 45 if we were lucky to have lived that long. But, here we are, having heart transplants, having a suit tie that's brought in from products all around the world, every piece of it voluntary, right? And the fact that we somehow don't feel comfortable in conveying this to the next generation so they can build on it and increase it is a tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bizarre psychosis where we denigrate success so we rationalize failures. To try and somehow make the two equivalent. But that is what's happening, and it's happening with people who you would otherwise describe as bright, who otherwise, have good ACT, SAT scores and all of the other.
They're surprised when I ask them a question, and it surprises them. The question surprises them, and then I tell them something, and that surprises them. The question is this: who did Steve Jobs oppress to become a billionaire? And the answer is
Steve Wozniak.
He increased value for people. He made people's lives better. He was a jerk, but he made people's lives better, and that's what made him a billionaire. And the thing that surprises them when I tell them is I say, think about George Soros, who really hated George W. Bush and was a multi-billionaire, and he didn't lose his wealth. Think about the Koch brothers. Don't like Barack Obama at all, and yet they're each worth $40 billion, right? And they don't lose their wealth. Think about how many countries in history that could happen in. It can't happen in Russia today. You're on the wrong side of Putin. You're either a dead ex-billionaire, or you've gotten out to England and you've got bodyguards around you to make sure that you're not assassinated. But in the United States, you can just do all of these things. It's an achievement, and it's fragile. And people need to understand how valuable it is. And I don't think that we're conveying that in our education.
He is Charles Lipson, political science professor, chair political science professor at the University of Chicago. Charles, thanks so much for joining us on Against the Current. Appreciate it.
What a pleasure.